I love this part of the event. You've ever noticed there's all this hooping and hollering and clapping, and then I come out quiet, totally quiet. I just love that part. I didn't mean you to do that. I actually have some. This is fun. It was fun for me to do some research on this subject. Directly related to the subject of this art, of Haydn's creation, is a question that's on everybody's minds right now. The ecological issues in front of us: massive pollution, ozone depletion, carbon emissions, climate change, the destruction of habitats, and the extinction of species, deforestation, soil erosion. These are ecological crises. 1/3 of the population of the world, approximately 2.2 billion people, are professing Christians. They're in Christian churches. And the question, it's a big question today, is Christianity going to be part of the problem, or is it going to be part of the solution? Does the Christian way of thinking, does the Bible, does the Christian doctrine and teaching and view of the world, is that going to get in the way of dealing with our environmental crisis, or is it actually going to be a resource for it? That's a very, very big question. And a lot of people think, of course, the answer is no. Christian theology is of no help. And I'd like to start off my talk here about this question of, can Christian faith be green? You know, what is the relationship of Christian theology to environmental issues and environmentalism? I'd like to start off by going into two corners. In this corner, we've got somebody who says absolutely Christian theology and Christian belief is a problem, and it contributes to our environmental crises. And in this corner, we've got a couple of people who say no, Christianity gives unsurpassed resources for dealing with our environmental crises. Now, in this corner over here, no offense to those of you who are over here, we have Lynn White, who wrote a very important, seminal, landmark kind of essay in 1967, 41 years ago now. He was a professor, Lynn White, was a professor of medieval studies at Princeton, and in Science magazine he wrote an essay called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. Now, it's an extremely important essay because he basically said the historical roots of our ecological crisis, the reason we've got the crisis we do today, and that was 1967, he says the main reason for our crisis is Christianity. So he put forth the idea. He was a medieval scholar, which meant he looked at the history of the Middle Ages, and he perceived the roots of our problems in the Christian theology that he saw coming to fruition in Europe in the Middle Ages. And he basically said this: Christian theology leads naturally to the exploitation of nature. And the reason for that is, if you go back into the texts, Genesis 1, which we've been singing about all night beautifully, wonderfully. You'll take a look at that and you see it says that human beings were made in the image of God to rule. That's the word that Genesis 1 uses, to rule and have dominion over the nature, over the material creation. And Lynn White said that very idea, that human beings are in some way superior, that they're over nature, that they've got the image of God, they have a soul, and nature does not, has been devastating. He says, ancient people understood that human beings were no different than the rest of nature, that everything was divine, and human beings were absolutely equal, spiritually speaking, with nature. But Christianity comes along, gives this idea that human beings are superior to nature, that they have the image of God, that they are supposed to rule over nature. And as Lynn White says, what that led to is what he calls a superior and contemptuous attitude toward nature. That even though our society, our Western society, he called it post-industrial and post-Christian, which it is, we still have these ideas that are making us at best indifferent and worse exploiters of nature, because we actually, he thinks, Christianity leads us to see nature as only a means to an end, something to be cut up for our consumption, something that's only good for helping us meet our needs. and that's Lynn White. Now, that essay has had an enormous impact, and I'm afraid that in many parts of the environmental movement that's just accepted. In fact, Lynn White went so far as to say, you don't even have to be a Christian in order to be affected in a negative way by Christian theology. He says, our whole society, we've got to get rid of the very idea that human beings are made in the image of God, that they have a soul and a special responsibility to God that the rest of nature doesn't. We've got to get rid of the very idea. Okay? Christian theology cannot be green. It's a problem. In this corner, let me give you two practitioners. In fact, if you read the New York Times, like a lot of people do around here, you may have heard about both of these folks. First one is a man named Stuart L. Pym. He's a professor of conservation ecology at Duke University. He's quite a scientist. He is a leader in environmentalism, and he, in 2006, he won the Heineken Prize for Environmental Sciences, which is the Nobel Prize, essentially, of the ecology world. And he is an absolute champion, especially of endangered species. He actually came through here not too long ago. There was an interview. He taught at Columbia University in the area of environmental science from like 1999 to 2002, but he came through here recently, and there was a big interview with him in the Science Times section of the New York Times. And he's an activist. He's not just a scientist. So just to give you an example of how passionate he is, he was asked, since he's very concerned about endangered species, he was asked, have you had any successes lately? And he says yes. And he gives two examples to show you how active he is. He says, on the Atlantic coast of Brazil, we've been trying to save the golden lion tamarin, or maybe it's tamarin, I don't know how to pronounce that, but an endangered primate about the size of a house cat. Last year, with the involvement of local conservationist groups, we helped purchase 270 acres of cattle pasture that separated two patches of their habitat. The former pasture is now being replanted with trees. The two areas will soon be bridged, and it will be possible for golden lion lonely hearts to meet members of the opposite sex and go forth and multiply. And in another South American region, I won't name here, there have been a lot of illegal logs taken. Why? Because a local godfather there was getting kickbacks from loggers. My friends and I decided we'd give him a bit more money if he stopped the illegal logging. I may burn in hell forever for paying protection, but it did help the animals and the indigenous people who were not subjected to a lot of bad things. In terms of what we got for the money, it was a very good deal. He's very active, even though he's a scientist. At the very end, big surprise, at the very end, the question came to him, are you religious? And then suddenly he says, oh yes, I'm a believing Christian. God so loved the cosmos that he gave his only son. That's an injunction from the Gospel of St. John. To me, this means that Christians have an obligation to look after the world. We've been given a stewardship. We cannot pointlessly drive species to extinction and destroy the forests and oceans. That would be unfaithful to God. When we do that, we're destroying the creation God gave us. So here's a kind of walking contradiction of everything Lynn White says. Here's a man who is, because of Christian theology and the idea that human beings are more responsible, because we're in the image of God, for the creation. That is what drives this man into being a passionate scientist and activist. In other words, exactly what Lynn White says shouldn't be happening. And that is, Christian theology has driven him and made him a passionate environmentalist. Let me give you another one that I really think is kind of fun. I hope you don't mind me reading about this. Have you heard of Polyface Farm in Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, which is outside of Stanton? Depends on where you're from. And it's a farm that actually was featured in a New York Times Magazine article. And it's run by a man named Joel Salatin, who is a strong Christian and who bases his farming on his understanding of creation and of what the Bible says about creation. I'll get to this in a second. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about this. Polyface Farm is committed to resisting the America's highly industrialized food production system, which relies on massive injections of growth hormones and antibiotics into the animals, the confinement of animals, farming practices that erode soil and deplete groundwater, and lots of synthetic fertilizer and toxic pesticides. Now, here's what Joel Salatin does. There's nothing sentimental about the approach. He still knows he's raising animals to be used for food. And yet, this is all from this article. It does so He does so by learning from and attending to the patterns of the symbiotic life, noting carefully how different species live best with each other, and making use of those patterns rather than imposing on creation an industrial or market efficiency model. Here's what he does. Number one, cattle eat the grass in the pasture, but only for a very limited section each day. The next day, the portable electric fences are moved and the cattle go to another patch. And then the eggmobile comes and all the laying hens are put into the field that the cattle were on yesterday. Following behind the cattle, they rummage through the pasture, they move the manure around, they do what they do best, and they stimulate optimum grass growth as a result. The pasture will produce an excellent hay crop. Number three, the cattle then, who are created to eat grass, are not fed corn, nor are they stacked up and confined to standing in their own waste. As a result, they don't need hormones and antibiotics that are indispensable to most all industrial beef production. Polyface Farms is against that. Nor do they produce the deadly strains of E. coli now regularly surfacing in our food supply. The chickens, meanwhile, are not confined either. They're put out into the pasture, and as a result, they don't peck at each other like their confined and stressed industrial counterparts. They're free to roam. The fields, in turn, do not require synthetic fertilizers or toxic pesticides. Conventional farmers who visit Polyface Farm are routinely baffled by the fact that Salatin has no need of costly and toxic inputs. Not only that, he treats his animals extremely well. The pigs are treated like kings. After the cattle leave for pasture, the pigs are allowed to go into the places where the cattle are, and they, look into the manure for fermented corn. I wasn't sure. I mean, I know this is a church situation, and I shouldn't be talking about stuff like this, but not surprisingly, while many farmers are losing topsoil to erosion, compaction, or toxic death, Salatin is actually building it. There is so much, rich soil being produced by this approach, gradually filling the gullies some 14 feet deep that were on the farm when his father bought the place in 1961. Working with creation rather than against it has made it so productive, and chefs throughout Virginia and Washington, D.C. can't get enough of his eggs and meat because they simply taste better. Nor do you have to worry about poisoning or periodic recalls. What does Salatin call this? He calls it forgiveness farming. He says, industrial food production has no room for kindness or mercy. It's all about maximizing the bottom line. Fields and animals are put through the stresses of confinement and forced feeding. Fields are subjected to a regimen of fertilizer and pesticide, all of which take a huge toll on creation. But in the dance of creation that is Polyface Farm, the fields and the animals play off of each other's strengths. There's room for failure and acceptance because each member of the dance can be itself. He concedes that his views are way too Christian for most liberals and way too environmentalist for most conservatives. Now, who's right? How can Christian theology produce people like Stuart Pimm and Joel Salatin? Here's how. Let me just tell you there's four. I'm not going to say that you can't be a really passionate environmentalist unless you're a Christian. I'm just going to say there are unsurpassable. There are no better intellectual and spiritual and moral resources for a passion for care of creation and in the environment than you can find in Christianity. There's four. And these four you can see working in these guys' lives. And here's what they are. Number one, the first thing the Bible teaches is the goodness of creation. If you go back to the beginning, Genesis 1, and we did here tonight, you see God making things. And when he makes something, he's constantly saying, and it was good. So he made the light in the day, it was good. He made the vegetation, and it was good. He made the land, and it was good, right? He's making the birds and the fish, and it was good. They were good. Now, what does that mean? This is God, remember? God is omniscient. So God wasn't making something the way we do, and then he stands back and says, what do you know? That's good. No, he knows it's good. He's enjoying it. He's not discovering that it's good. He's enjoying it because it reflects his goodness. And notice, he says it is good before there's any human beings around. That's the interesting thing about Genesis 1. He doesn't say, this will be good when the guys, the men and the women get here, then they'll be able to eat it or cut it up. No, it is good. It was in itself good. And Psalm 19 and other places say, the heavens are telling the glory of God, the sun, the stars, the mountains, the hills are praising God. Now, what is that? Is that just sort of poetic hyperbole? No. The point is, if it's true that the creation reflects the very goodness of God, if it's a kind of reflection of the beauty and wonder of God in some way. Just like the art of an artist reflects something in the inner being of the artist. That means that the way a tree praises God is by just being a tree. The grandeur of a tree shows us something of the grandeur of God. That's what Psalm 19 is saying. It says, how can nature praise God? Is it just hyperbole? No, it is praising God by being itself. And that means that for us to look at nature and to say, I want to keep this the way it is part of, it's a good in itself. It's not, Lynn White, for example, at one point says, to a Christian, a tree can be no more than a physical fact. The whole concept of the sacred grove, the idea that, that trees are divine and the water is divine. You see, he says, Christianity says God is divine and we're in the image of God and the nature isn't divine. We don't worship nature anymore, and that's been bad. He says, you see, Christians have sort of disenchanted nature. And therefore, for a Christian, a tree is just a fact and something to be used. I don't think that he's ever meditated, for example, on Psalm 65 that says, O Lord, you care for the land and you water it. You enrich it abundantly. You drench its furrows and level its ridges. You soften it with showers and bless its crops. The grasslands overflow. The hills are clothed with gladness. The meadows are covered with flocks and the valleys are mantled with grain. They shout together and sing for joy to you. Or Psalm 96 and says, then shall the trees of the wood sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. What this is telling us is that we are like curators. God is the artist. The world is his gallery. What's the job of a curator? Well, you don't just leave the art. I mean, human beings were put into the world to be gardeners, we're told in Genesis 2. Gardener's not the same as a park ranger. Gardeners move things around. They do things with creation. But they honor it, they cherish it, and they're seeking to liberate it to be what it is, to praise God. That's behind Polyface Farm. That's behind Stuart Pym. The goodness of creation. The goodness of creation. That the creation is praising God, and we help it praise God by enabling it to be what it is. It's a good in itself. Number one, goodness of creation. Number two, the second thing the Bible talks about, though, is the stewardship of creation. And there are, when God puts us into the garden in Genesis 2 to take care of it, that's a very interesting image, is it not? What is a gardener? A gardener doesn't exploit the land. A gardener cultivates it. But perhaps the most astounding passage in the Bible for the purpose of environmental theology, if there is such a thing, is in Genesis 8. In Genesis 8 and 9, we have the flood. That's a devastation of creation, right? But then, afterwards, God comes to Noah, and he says this. He says, never again will I curse the ground because of you. As long as, even though every inclination of human being's heart is evil from childhood, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. That's interesting. But then he goes on and says, I will establish my covenant with you, Noah, and with every living creature on the earth. And then he goes further and says down in verse 13 of chapter 8, my covenant is between me and the earth. After the flood, he comes and he says, I'm making a covenant with the earth. Now that's an astounding statement, because in the Bible, a covenant relationship was something that God only entered into in order to save somebody. He enters into a covenant relationship with Abraham or with Moses or with David to save them. So for him to say, I am now entering into a covenant relationship with the earth, is an amazing statement. Why does the earth need to be saved? Has the earth sinned? No, the earth hasn't sinned. We've sinned. So what does the earth need to be saved from? It doesn't need to be saved from its own sin. What it's saying in Genesis 8 and 9 is God says, I am committed to saving you from humanity's sin. It's an amazing statement. He says, I am committed to the earth and the living creatures of the earth. And human beings, because of their evil, are going to devastate it. And I am committed to saving the earth from human beings. It's an amazing statement. What it means then is, Stuart Pym is right when he says, if I'm on God's side and I see human beings ruining the earth, and he's made a covenant with the earth and a covenant with all the living things, then I've got to get on God's side, and I have got to defend the earth from exploitation. You talk about a moral, intellectual, theological resource for caring for creation. I don't think you could find a stronger one than that. You say, oh, I've never heard that. No, you probably haven't. We haven't mined, as it were, that resource for environmental care, but we need to. You say, that is very odd. Yes, but it's actually that attitude by God toward the earth is all there. For example, in the law of Moses, in Deuteronomy 25:4, this sounds like Polyface Farm, listen. God says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Law of God, do not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. And some of you are saying, there's one of the laws of God I will probably never, ever break. Now, what is it talking about? What it was talking about was harvested sheaves were spread out on the ground, and an animal in harness would walk around and round, dragging a heavy wooden sledge with a stone that would sever the grain from the stalks. So when the ox was doing that, it was basically helping in grain production. Now, the best way you could possibly make sure you maximize your profits was to put a muzzle on the ox, because when the ox saw the grain, it ate it. You don't want to give the ox 3% of the grain, or 5% of the grain. You want all of it, right? You want to maximize your profits. See, that's you want market efficiency, and therefore you put a muzzle on it. God says no. God says no. You need to share your grain with the animal who's helping you provide it. In fact, in Proverbs 10, this is Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10, it says, a righteous man cares for the needs of his animal, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. Loving animals, being humane toward animals, being a steward of God's creation, being on God's side of loving the earth and keeping it from being exploited by human beings to maximize profits is a mark of righteousness, according to the Bible. Or listen to this in Deuteronomy 20, verse 19. I know these aren't verses that we usually talk about, but there they are. It says, when you lay siege to a city, so he's talking to an army, military, Israel, going in and, going about their battles and so on. When you lay siege to a city for a long time, fighting against it to capture it, do not destroy the trees by putting an axe to them. Do not cut them down. Are the trees of the field people that you should besiege them? Isn't that interesting? What does he say? Why would God be counseling ecological restraint to an army? He says, look, those people are your enemies. Those people are trying to kill you. Those people are trying. Go ahead. Besiege them. I mean, that's another sermon. But he's saying the trees. You see, what was very typical was you went in there and you destroyed everything. You destroyed the crops. You destroyed the ground. You destroyed the trees. You cut everything down. You're mad. You're an army. I'm out to kill. Ah. And he says, when it comes to nature, are the trees people that you should besiege them? Let them be. Ecological restraint. So first you have the goodness of creation. Secondly, the stewardship of creation. You see the power of these resources. Two more, brief. Third, the fallenness of creation. One of the things that is important, and a very important question, if you're a secular person, you may care about the environment very, very deeply. But you have a question. What's wrong with species extinction? What's wrong with it? I mean, that's how you got here. Some species got extinct and you didn't, or, your ancestors, your far ancestors, this is evolutionary theory, your far ancestors, survived and others did not. And it's the strong eat the weak. It's dog eat dog. It's nature is red in tooth and claw. So if you're a secular person and you see plagues, you see pesticides, disease, you see species extinction, so what? What's the problem? Or you say, yeah, but that's human beings cutting down the forest. We're part of nature, aren't we? I thought that was what Lynn White was saying. We're no different than anything else in nature. We're just doing what we do. And we're changing the environment. We don't adapt to the environment. The environment doesn't adapt to us. I mean, we're part of nature. What's the big deal about deforestation? You see, but the Bible says that someday nature is going to be perfected. Isaiah talks about the desert blooming. And the Bible talks about the fact that for some reason, it's a little mysterious for us to understand, because we are fallen, because we human beings are not what we should be before God, nature isn't what it's going to be. Nature is to some degree fallen. It's marred to some degree. And what does that mean? What that means is if we go out there and we see things that we think in nature seem to need repair, like let's stop disease, we can do it. That's the reason why, because we have an understanding of the fallenness, the idea of sin, that nature isn't the way God meant it in every way, in every regard, then we've got a warrant for doing what Stuart Pym does. Or as C.S. Lewis puts it, when a Christian is confronted with cancer or anything wrong in nature, the secular person may say, if you could only see it from another point of view, you would realize that this is just the way things are. But the Christian replies, don't talk such damn nonsense, for Christianity is a fighting religion. It thinks God made the world, that space and time, heat and cold, and all the colors and tastes and all the animals and vegetables are things that God made up out of his head as a man makes up a story. But it also thinks that a great many things have gone wrong with the world that God has made, and that God insists, and insists very loudly, on our putting those things right again. Albert Camus, in his novel The Plague, doesn't seem to grasp this. It's an incredibly great novel, and it's all about a town in Algiers where there's a plague that comes in. First through the rats, all start to die, then the people start to die, and the plague is the town is quarantined and the people are dying, and there's a philosophical, of course, Camus was a philosopher, and the philosophical issue was this. Isn't this God's will? I mean, God made the world like this. Isn't this God's will? And if you don't believe in God, then isn't this just nature? Right? Nature red in tooth and claw. We're dying off. This is the way nature is. So why fight the plague? Why not just run? Why not just leave? Just get out. Why stand and fight the plague and risk your life to fight it? Because if the world is made by God, then this is God's will. If the world isn't made by God, it's just nature, then it's nature. So why fight the plague? And he says, it's absurd to fight the plague. There's no reason to fight the plague, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's an existentialist. It's actually, in many ways, a very brave and great book. Except, its theology is a little problematic at one point, and here's the reason why. He has no concept of the fall. That though God made this world, God didn't make a world filled with disease and death. And so at one point he actually says, if you're going to fight the plague, you have to say, if I fight the plague, then I stand on man's side, humanity's side, against God. And if on the other hand I don't fight the plague, then I'm on God's side against humanity. But I'm going to be on humanity's side. But when Jesus Christ, in John chapter 8 says, before Abraham was, I am. He actually says, I am God. He takes the divine name. And then in chapter 11, he's standing in front of the tomb of his friend Lazarus, who has just died of the plague or of disease. So he claims to be God. He's standing before a man who has just died of the plague, and the Bible says he's angry. In fact, the Greek actually says he was furious. He was furious at death. He was furious at this man's life being cut off before his time. He was furious at the devastation. He was furious at the disease. Wait, do you see what that means? Jesus Christ, who says he's God, can be mad at the plague and still not mad at himself. Because he knows this isn't the way it's supposed to be. And the fact is that Jesus Christ came to die on the cross so that someday he could end the plague, he could end evil, he could end sin, he could forgive us for our sins, and someday end all evil so that someday he could end evil without ending us. See? He died for us so that someday he could end all this without ending us. And therefore, because we believe in the fallenness of creation, we can fight it, see, as C.S. Lewis said. One last thing. We're told that at the end of the book of Revelation, the end of the book of the Bible, we don't have individuals rising out of this material world to go to heaven forever. We have heaven coming down to heal this material world. And the final resource that Christians have for a care for the environment is that God is so committed to this material creation that someday he is going to actually heal it. It's going to have no more disease, no more death. He's going to heal it, and we're going to live in a material world forever. That's what the Bible says. No other religion says that. In fact, secularism says this world is here temporarily and then it's going to burn up, right? And other religions say this world is temporary and then we go off to heaven or into the all soul in some way, right? Only the Bible says this world is permanent. God is so absolutely committed to it, he's going to heal it. He's going to have his son die on the cross to heal it. In fact, the fact that God becomes human and takes on a material body in Jesus Christ is also unique. There's no other religion in the world that says God loved matter so much he became part of it. And he became part of it so that he could remake it and we could live in it forever. So, there it is. What are our resources? Our resources are the goodness of creation, which the Bible teaches, the stewardship of creation, and that covenant that God makes with it, the fallenness of creation, and the final restoration of creation. And that's enough to turn you into people who are passionate for caring for the environment and going to the mat in order to honor God's covenant with it. Now, what we're going to do here is this. I just finished the lecture. We have one more piece of music to hear. We're going to have the offering, and I'd like to ask the ushers to come down. Now, those of you who are visiting and guests, don't say, oh my gosh, I thought this was free and here this is coming. Those people who ordinarily come to church on a Sunday, this is their way just to continue to support the work we do here. This is not a bait and switch, okay? But the main reason for the offering, besides that little basket coming around, is to get one more piece of music out of this wonderful set of musicians and this wonderful Haydn's creation. And after that, I'll come back to dismiss you and tell those of you who want to stay for the Q&A what to do next.
For more of this series and other resources from Timothy Keller and Redeemer Presbyterian Church, please visit www.gospelinlife.com.
If you turn in your bulletin to the passage on which the teaching is based, it's a psalm, because we're doing a short series on the Psalms. And what we're doing is we're taking a different emotion every week. And this week, you just guess what it is. Let's read it. I'm going to read Psalm 3, all of it, verses 1 to 8. And then we're going to also read a very important parallel passage, just 2 verses out of Genesis 15. So I'm going to read Psalm 3, 1 to 8, Genesis 15, 1 and 8. A psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I awake again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Genesis 15 says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield and your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, how can I know? How can I know I will gain possession of it? This ends the reading of God's word. Now, the Psalms are deeply emotional prayers. And you know, we modern people have this pride that we're really into emotional honesty, unlike, traditional cultures. We're into emotional honesty, but I don't know about this. The Psalms, if you actually read them through, Modern people are always taken aback by the Psalms. Take a look at verse 7. Didn't you squirm a little bit? See how angry he's getting? Break the jaw, smash the teeth of my enemies. Now, if you're a modern person, modern New Yorker, even though, you might, whether you're religious or not religious or whatever you are, you have a tendency to say, now, David, we mustn't be angry at our enemies, must control ourselves. But you see, the Psalms are too real for that. The Psalms are saying, but I'm angry, you see, and it's not just there. It's all sorts of places in the Psalms. The emotions are hot, they're raw, they're intense, they make us uncomfortable. Why? Because the Psalms give us a unique approach to emotions. The Psalms, they're giving us a third way. I said this every week, right? On the one hand, the religiosity approach to prayer, to emotions is stuff them, deny them. Act like they're not there. We're uncomfortable with these strong emotions. We need to get control of them quickly. And one of the ways we get control of our strong emotions in religious circles is not admit they're there. On the other hand, in secular circles, there's a sort of a love of just expressing our emotions as if it's a good in itself. The Psalms don't do either. The Psalms do not say that we should be under-aware of our emotions or overawed by our emotions. We shouldn't be stuffing our emotions or bowing to them. We shouldn't be denying them or venting them. We should be praying them. And we don't mean by praying them that you put them into nicely manicured and managed little theologically correct confessional prayers, but you pre-reflectively pour them out into the presence of God and you process them there. You don't just vent them, you don't just stuff them, you don't just, express them. And what we have today is maybe the most primal of all the emotions. Maybe the most primal. I could be wrong on this. I've seen 3 babies born, my 3, and they all came out crying. But what do those tears mean? What did they really mean? Were they tears of doubt? See, that was one of the emotions we looked at, right? Are the babies coming out saying, I don't know about this? No, that's not it. Maybe, but no, I don't think so. Are they tears of sorrow and grief? We talked about that emotion last week. Are they tears of sorrow and grief? No, that's too complex for a baby. It's not sorrow and grief. There's a more primary emotion than doubt. There's a more primary emotion than grief and sorrow, and that's the first sound, your first sound. Our first sound is a wail of fear. The baby comes out saying, where are the walls? There were nice walls. Why is it so cold? Who's got a finger down my mouth? Who's grabbing me? Why did you hit me? What's going on? Everything was fine. I'm scared. It's all new. What's going on? And that is the way you come into the world. And fear, therefore, is the most primal of all emotions, maybe. And what's interesting? David has got something to be afraid of. He's got literal armies after him. He's got literal people after him trying to kill him. And right in the middle, what does he get to? I will not fear. I sleep in the midst of all these armies. So he has discovered a way of praying his fear, because Psalm 3 is a praying his fear. He's found a way of praying his fear so that he's able to handle it. And if it could help him, I know a lot of you have got troubles, but, probably you don't have an army after you. David did, and he was able to handle it. So what do we learn here about fear and about how to handle it? Well, the answer is there's 2 levels down into fear we learn from this psalm, and there's 4 steps out. Very practical. The more I've been meditating on this psalm, the more I say, gee, why didn't I understand this years ago? 2 levels down, 4 steps out. Okay, look at the 2 levels down. They're the first 2 verses. David says, what's he saying in his first 2 verses? David says, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Now, those are 2 levels of fear. Let me show you what I mean. You see the heading? When did David pray this? When his son Absalom had arisen and had started a coup attempt. Absalom had himself declared king, and David had to run into the wilderness to flee for his life. He's being deposed as king, and there's an army after him to literally imprison and kill him. And so David experiences, first in verse 1, when he says, many are my foes. Sometimes paranoid people are right. And here's one of these places where here's a guy who says, everybody's after me, everybody's after me. Tens of thousands of people are after me. And he's right, unfortunately for him. And so the first thing we have is he's being attacked, his body's being attacked, his physical being is being attacked. They're after him to imprison him or kill him. But In verse 2, we have something deeper. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Now, you have to read that. That verse doesn't seem like much until you read it in the context of the kingship, that this is what they're saying about the king. And here's what this means. They are not just attacking his body, but his identity. They're attacking his calling. They're attacking his character. If you go back into 2 Samuel chapter 15 to 18, you'll see it. Here's what they were doing. What they were doing is this. They were saying, remember King Saul? Remember how King Saul sinned? The king before David. He sinned and he did wrong, and God abandoned him. God took the kingship from him. See, God fled from him, withdrew from him. That's what's happening to David. See, look at the terrible things David has done. He had an affair with Bathsheba, and then he murdered her husband Uriah. What terrible things he's done. How can a man like that be our king? He's forfeited his right to be our king. That's what's going on in verse 2. And what that means is David is not just simply being attacked physically, he's being attacked psychologically, spiritually. His very identity is under attack and assault, as well as his actual physical life. Now you say, what does that teach us? Some of you are saying, well, not much. I mean, I'm not the potentate of a small Near Eastern nation, nor am I likely to ever have a career move in that direction in the near future. So what do I need Psalm 3 for? Well, I'd like to show you that it's very relevant to you. In the middle of the 20th century, there was an awful lot of work done by philosophers and writers and psychologists and psychiatrists about anxiety. And W.H. Auden wrote a very famous poem in 1947 called The Age of Anxiety, in which he called our modern times the age of anxiety. And there was a lot of consensus that we modern people have a lot more anxiety disorders than our ancestors did. And much of the work was very helpful back in those days, and it still is. And a lot of people back then, not so much now, made a distinction between fear and anxiety. Now, I'm going to say a couple times, I don't think you can completely separate those words like that. In the Bible, fear and anxiety are really not two separate things. They're different ways of talking about the same thing. In our modern life, we don't tend to... fear and anxiety or worry are kind of similar. But for a moment, I believe that these guys who were talking about this were getting at something important. They were really talking about two kinds or even two levels of fear. One they called fear, one they called anxiety. And though I don't know you can really separate the words like that, they're right about these two levels. Rollo May, for example, is a good example of this kind of theorist. Rollo May, who is a pretty... his books are still out. I mean, a lot of his books. He wrote this in the 50s and 60s about anxiety and fear, and this is how he showed you the difference. He said in one book, if you are walking across a highway and you see a car speeding toward you, your heart beats faster. You focus your eyes on the distance between the car and you focus and see how far you have to go to get to the other side of the street, and you run. This is fear. But if after the cars have sped away and the day goes on, if after the danger is over, you find that there is an abiding feeling of hollowness, an abiding feeling that you're fragile, an abiding sense that your life is fragile, he says, this is anxiety. Anxiety is what we feel when our existence as selves is threatened. Now, what he's doing, I think, is helpful. He's saying there's a healthy kind of fear, and there's a deeper, unhealthy, and debilitating kind of fear. Now, the first kind, what he calls fear, is there's a healthy fear. It is specific, and it's constructive. Now, what do I mean? Well, let me give you an example of this. I was, some of you heard me use the illustration, but it's a good one, and Kathy suggested I use it again. When our middle son was 4 years old, I had put him, like a really smart young father, I'd put him at the top of this 8 or 9 foot sliding board, very tall, very high sliding board on this playground. And then I had walked to the other end of the sliding board, which is very long, at least 12 feet away, and I was waiting at the end of the sliding board, and Michael, being a typical 4-year-old, stood up and pitched backward. And he was heading on down to the concrete, and I caught him. And Kathy and I still look back and say, how did you do that? And Kathy sometimes says, do that again, and I'll never be able to do it again. And the answer, I caught him, and here's the reason why. I'll tell you what the researchers would tell you. My autonomic nervous system was set into place by my fear. And I had this enormous burst of physical energy and mental clarity. And it's almost like time slowed down. It felt like I had 5 minutes at least to get there. And what they'll say is simply this. Fear is healthy. Fear can be healthy. Healthy fear is like this. You have a specific threat, and you identify something good that's threatened. The life of your son, or your own life, which is a way of saying my life is good. It's worth protecting. And then what fear does is it helps you, summons up all your deepest capacities to do something to protect the thing that you know is so important. So fear is specific and it's constructive. It gets you together. It galvanizes you for action. It's great. But then there's another kind. And Rollo May is right when he says it's a deeper kind. He calls it anxiety. For the moment, let's do that. And here's what it means. And you see the difference. Anxiety, unlike fear, is not specific. It's diffuse. It's generalized. It's sort of amorphous. It's undefined. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what it's attached to. You don't know why it's there. You don't know what exactly is causing it. With fear, you know he's falling, or the car's coming after me. With anxiety, you don't know what exactly is wrong. So it's not specific, it's diffuse. Secondly, fear galvanizes you for action, but this anxiety, this deeper kind of fear, debilitates you and paralyzes you. It makes you unable to act. It makes you unable to make a decision. And what the researchers are finding is fear is a good thing. Fear is like a thunderstorm that comes on through and there's all this thunder and lightning, and then it passes away and the sun comes out and everything's greener for it. But this deeper kind of anxiety is not like the thunderstorm of fear. This deeper kind of anxiety is sort of like a cold drizzle. 34 degrees and raining all the time. Sort of like the Shetlands or the Orkney Islands, all the time, always raining. And instead of it passing through and making everything greener, after a while your soul starts to mildew. And you know what the researchers will tell you? This kind of deeper anxiety, this deeper kind of sense of fear that's abiding, that's diffuse, that you can't really put your finger on, that goes down into your roots. When you're always agitated, always nervous, always sort of upset, always kind of restless, always a little bit scared, your autonomic nervous system is always on. Now this is bad for you physically, because your autonomic nervous system is a fight or flight thing. It's there for bursts of energy, for crises. But when it's always on, because you're always agitated, you're always kind of, pushing yourself, and you're always kind of nervous, you're always looking around, you're always kind of scared and restless and agitated. You're always agitated. The autonomic nervous system stays on all the time, and you get ulcers, you get high blood pressure. You're literally you're getting eaten away in the inside. Well, what causes it then? And here's what Rollo May said. Remember what he said? He said it's not just a threat to your physical being, it's not just a threat to your existence, it's a threat to your sense of self. Anxiety comes when something that you have put your real security in, something that made you feel in control, something that made you feel like you had an identity, that is being eaten away at. And that's the reason why this deeper kind of thing, this deeper kind of root, it has more spiritual roots. This is something that really is destructive. An example, I know professional athletes, really good professional athletes, while they're in their career, fear is a good thing. For example, one of the reasons why they catch that fly ball is they're afraid it'll go over their head. And everybody will say, we lost the World Series because of you. You were playing in too shallow. So you run back and get it. Fear is a good thing when you're an athlete. You're afraid of doing bad, or you're afraid that you had a bad game, so you got to turn your batting average around or whatever. But when their career's over, and they've lost that thing that they really made them feel that they had some identity, and no longer are they the athlete. Who are they now? And they begin to experience that anxiety. They begin to experience a certain kind of a lack of control. My security, something that was my security is gone. And that's the reason why David has got two levels here. He's not just being assaulted in his physical being, but his very identity is being assaulted. And his very sense of who he is being assaulted. And therefore he's down in the pit. And if you put on top of the normal fear, see, Rollo May suggests, as he does in his example, that these things come together. You may have the normal good kind of fear and that debilitating acidic anxiety fear together. But when they're together, you'll sink. You're down in a pit. That's the reason why I've said we're at the bottom of a pit here. And David is really at the bottom. So what's he going to do about it? He's down at the bottom. He's to the lowest level of fear. He's just frightened. What does he do? Look at verse 3. There's 4 things from verse 3 to the end that he does. See, verse 3 starts with a very important word. Whenever you're having any trouble with emotions, I'm scared, I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm doubtful, whatever, I'm guilty, whatever your feelings are, the first word in verse 3 is very important. But. He's saying, I'm scared, but he's going to do something. He's turning. And the 4 things he does, the 4 steps out of the pit, are all there in verses 3 to 8. I'll tell you what they are, then I'll tell you what they are. Follow your thread, relocate your glory, see the substitute, remember the people. That's the 4 things. See? Follow your thread, relocate your glory, see the substitute, and remember the people. Let's get started. Number 1, follow your thread. Now, verse 3 says, but you are a shield for me. No, that's not what it says. You are a shield to me. No, that's not what it says. What does it say? You're a shield around me. Now, that's a very telling phrase. Very telling. Why? Well, there's 2 kinds of shields we can talk about here. Not that I'm this great expert, but just do what the commentaries tell me. There's a little shield that you can put on your arm, and you're in hand-to-hand combat, and what you're doing with that little shield is you're moving it all around, of course. You can move it all around, and you see somebody coming at you, and you use it to ward off the blow of your opponent, and then you take your other arm, your right arm if you're right-handed, and you make a blow, and then you shield yourself from a blow, and then you make a blow, and that's a shield. But that kind of shield certainly in no way, in any sense, is around you. It's too small. There's another kind of shield, though, that's the size of a door that wraps around. You've probably seen pictures of it, probably in movies and things like that. And that's the kind of shield he must be talking about. But what is that kind of shield for? When do you use a shield like that? Not for hand-to-hand combat. You only use that kind of shield when you're following your general to go besiege a fortress. In other words, you only use that shield when you're going into horrible danger. This shield is not a shield that gets you away from danger. This is a shield that goes into danger. You only use this shield when you're going on purpose, following your general, into a place where they're going to do things like, pour hot lava down on you, throw 2-ton boulders down on you, spears, arrows, slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and so on. And so when David says, the first thing he says, I'm scared, but I remember that you are a shield around me. What is he doing? He is not just saying, I know that you won't let bad things happen to me. Is that what he's saying? I'm scared, but I know you will never let bad things. No, because of the kind of shield he's using. Here's what he's saying. He says, I'm scared, but I know that you often take me into danger. And your shielding, your protection, only works going forward. Only works when I'm obeying you. Only works when I'm actually following you. I know that no matter how bad things are, you are going to somehow work good things in my life. You're going to shield me. But you're not going to shield me from danger. You're not going to shield me from pain and arrows and spears. You're going to shield me in them or even with them. What do you mean with them? When he says you're a shield, what that means is anything that happens to you as a Christian, if you're a Christian and you're obeying God at this moment, anything bad that happens to you is part of his shielding of you. It means that even a bad thing that's happening to you now, even a pain, even an arrow in your side, is actually part of something that God is doing to protect you. What do you mean, protect me? If God lets you hurt today, it's because he's trying to save you from a greater hurt tomorrow. He's trying to wake you up now with some kind of, with a pain now to keep you from a greater pain. He'll bring you a loss now to keep you from a greater loss later. In other words, into danger, God's protection works. Obeying him, even though you don't understand why he's doing it, he'll protect you if you're willing to follow into danger. But if you run, that shield is of no help when you're running. The shield David's talking about is of no help when you're running away, no help when you're giving up, no help when you're disobeying the order of your general. You might as well just be, if you're coming in like this, onward, oh my gosh, onward, look at this. Well, how are we ever going to take this? So you turn around and run, then you're really dead. So there's only two things for you. Do you realize that? The Bible says obedience to God is very hard because He'll often take you places you don't understand. You'll make prayers, you're praying and you're obeying and you're trying to do your best and the prayers don't come true. In other words, obedience is extremely difficult, very confusing, very, very hard. But what's your alternative? Disobedience. And that's impossible. So those are your only two alternatives. Obedience is very, very, very hard. Disobedience is lethal. And the Bible says those are your only two alternatives for any human being before you. So the first thing David's doing is he's grabbing hold and he's saying, hey, listen, this is all I know. I'm scared. Bad things are happening to me. But God's protection only works if I'm going forward, if I'm following Him. It doesn't work backwards. The only way, in other words, David's saying 1 ounce of disobedience can hurt me more than 10 tons of pain and suffering. So I'm going to go forward. You know, a perfect example of this is George MacDonald's little fairy tale, The Princess and the Goblin. And it's a children's fairy tale, and it's about a little princess who lives in a big house, and she's surrounded by goblins that they're trying to protect her from. The goblins are trying to take her, trying to capture her. And they live in the mountain. One night, the little princess finds in the very topmost garret, like the attic of their house, that she has her fairy grandmother living there, a beautiful woman, supernatural woman, a woman of power and beauty and majesty. And little princess says, Grandmother, if I'm ever in danger, if I can just find you, I'll be all right. How can I do that? And the grandmother says, it's very simple. She gives her a ring. She says, I'm going to tie a little thread around the ring. And I'm going to put the other end of the thread, the ball of thread, in my drawer right here. Now, she says, whenever you're in danger, it's very simple. You take off the ring, put it under your pillow, pull the thread tight, and then put your forefinger on it and follow the thread, and it'll take you to me. And the little princess says, great, that's terrific. And the grandmother says, there's only one thing. It may take you in a roundabout way. So the first night that she's in danger, you know, the little princess is in her room, and suddenly she hears some creature has come in through the window, and she hears snarling and hissing. And so she takes off her ring, and she puts it under the pillow, and she pulls it tight, and she's very excited because immediately it starts to take her out of her room. But here's what, well, I don't know if I should read you. Yeah, I'll read the actual text to you. She says, she expected it to lead her straight up the old stair to her grandmother's room, but when she reached the door, to her surprise and dismay, the thread led her toward away from the stair in the opposite direction. And then to her shock, it led out of the door, out into the night. And then a greater shock, it began to lead her up the mountain. And finally, the thread took her right to a cave that took her down into the heart of the mountain, but she plunged in. She kept trying to say to herself, I know it's going to take me to my grandmother sometime. I know it. She tried so hard to think of her grandmother, but her heart was tried dreadfully when the thread took her down steep path after pit in the pitch dark, deeper and deeper into the mountain where the goblins lived. Through one narrow passage after another, finally the thread took her through a tiny little hole she had to creep through. Still on she went, obedient to the guiding thread. Finally it took her to a heap of stones piled in a slope against the wall of the cavern. Up on it she climbed until she found that it vanished right into the heap of stones and left her standing on it. She felt her grandmother had forsaken her, and then a thought struck her. At least she could follow the thread backward to get home. But the instant she tried to feel it backward, it vanished. Forward, it led into the heap of stones. Backward, it seemed to go nowhere. She burst into a wailing cry and threw herself down on the stones. Now that's a picture of what it means to follow Jesus. Over and over and over again, trying to do the right thing, trying to follow Christ, praying and hoping seems to take you to a wall. But if you go backward, it's not there at all. God's protection only goes forward. You have to remember something. Jesus himself one time was very scared. He was sweating in the garden. Why was he sweating? You don't sweat in sorrow. He was sweating blood. Why was he sweating? He was frightened. He was scared. It was all right to be scared. He should have been scared. And you know why? Because the thread of the will of God, the call of his general, was taking him right into a tomb. That's surely a dead end, isn't it? Over and over and over again, this is what's going to happen. To obey seems nuts. To obey seems like it's not going anywhere. The only thing David knows is to obey may take me into danger. That's the only way God's protection will work. That's the only way I know that he's working good things in my life. If I back out, if I go in the other direction, I have really something to be scared of, really something to be afraid of. So his first step is follow the thread, forward. Suck it up. That's the first step. That's always the first step. But that's not all. That's not enough. Stoicism won't get you through. Just sucking it up won't be enough. The second is, after follow your thread, second, relocate your glory. What does he say literally in the second part of verse 3? In the Hebrew, he's literally saying this: you are my glory and the lifter of my head. Now, what does it mean? Why would he say, you are my glory? In fact, don't forget, he's saying, but you are my glory. I'm scared, but you are my glory. Now, he wouldn't say, but you are my glory, unless something else has been. And this is what's going on. He has experienced this deeper level of fear, that anxiety that Rollo May's talking about. Why? Because the things that he built his identity on, the things that he built his emotional and psychological security on, had been taken away. And what are those things? Well, here's a man who had said, I am a popular sovereign, but not anymore. Or he might have said, I'm a good father. Well, that illusion is over. Or he said, well, but I have this great moral record. I have really, well, yeah, adultery, murder. Well, but I had the power. Not anymore, you don't. See, here's a man who's admitting something, and here's what he's admitting. He says, I'm filled with anxiety, yes, but it's because my moral record, my family's love, the approval of my people, and my political power, those are okay things, but I had located my glory in them. And what's glory? The word glory means weight. It means significance. And what he was saying is, these were good things, but I had located my glory in them. I had located my security. The reason I felt secure and good in life is because I'm a king, or I have the approval of my people. If you are starting to experience, as Rollo May says, this kind of debilitating, deep anxiety, here's what it is. Something good you've located your glory in. It's a good thing to be talented at something. It's a good thing to have a spouse who loves you. It's a good thing to have children that you are taking care of. It's a good thing. All these things are good. But if you locate your glory in them, what you've done is you've put your glory, your worth, your security in something finite. And finite things are out there in time and space, where they're vulnerable to the circumstances and history and vicissitudes of time and space. And you will always live in fear. And David realized that's what he'd done. See, what's interesting is the first step is follow your thread, which means suck it up. But that's not enough. Now he's examining his heart. He's really looking and saying, why am I this anxious? Why am I this scared? It's because I have located my glory in things that were good things, but now they're gone, and that's the reason I'm feeling like I'm falling. That's the reason I'm having this anxiety. When you get that kind of anxiety yourself, it's not enough just to stuff your feelings and go on. That's what a lot of you do. But it's also not enough just to sort of, wail. You have to say, your anxiety is smoke. And if you follow it, it'll take you to the fire. And the fire is something that's become too important to you. And therefore, what's going on is not stoicism stuffing it, but not ventilation. Instead, he is saying, I'm going to relocate my glory and I'm going to get new help. It's not their approval, it's your approval that's my glory. It's not serving them, it's serving you. It's not their love, it's your love. And when he says, you're the lifter of my head, an amazing statement. See, even today, lifter of my head means what? You lift up your head when you're proud, when you're confident. But a lifter of your head is somebody who says, I'm proud of you. You are, a lifter of your head says, get your head up. You're great. You're this, you're that. That's a lifter of your head. So here's what David's saying is, as great as it was to have the love of my family, I don't have it. The love of my people, I don't have it. The knowledge that I was a good king, I don't have that. The political power to do what I want, I don't have that. He says, and even though they're gone, I'm not going to make them my identity anymore. If I've got your approval, your honor, if I know you're proud of me, then I don't have to really be afraid. I've got a self back. Then I only have fear, not that deeper anxiety. So that's the second thing, relocate your glory. What's the third thing? Well, the third thing is very important, and here's why. The third thing is see the substitute. Somebody says, well, what does that mean? Well, surely there's some people out there saying, I don't know, by the way, you weren't listening carefully. Of course, I do talk fast, I know. But you weren't listening carefully if you're not asking this question. How in the world does David know that God is proud of him? I mean, listen. If you go to God, now, let's just go to God and say, oh, yeah, I killed somebody. I failed as a father. I failed as a king. I failed as a human being. I failed as a believer. I failed in every way, but I know you're proud of me. It'd be hard to say that, but David's saying it. David's saying, I failed in every way, but I know that you are the lifter of my head. I know that you honor me. I know that the knowledge that you're proud of me is my glory. How does he know that? And that's the issue. That's the whole key. Don't you realize if you knew that, if that was the heart of your identity, nothing really could bother you. Nothing could really scare you to death. You are scared to death to the degree that you've put your glory in something that can die. So, how does he know that? Well, he says, actually, he gives us a hint in verse 4, but in some ways the whole psalm is the hint. What's he say in verse 4? I will cry to you. He doesn't just say, I will cry to you and you will hear me. He says, I will cry to you and I have confidence that you will hear me. Why? Because of your holy hill. Well, what's on the holy hill? The tabernacle on Mount Zion, the place of sacrifice. David realizes his sins can be dealt with. Well, is that all he knew? Was that all did he just know in some vague general way when he saw the sacrifice on the altar that somehow God was dealing with his sins? No, I don't think so. I think he was thinking of the most amazing incident in all of the Bible. It's in Genesis 15, and I read you a little piece of it.